Hello, everybody. Sounds like the microphone is on and working. That's excellent. Thanks for joining me here today to talk about the Analysis Center version 4 that either you already have or potentially you can be moving to at any point in the near future. If you are a hosted client with Tech using either eCounsel or Secretariat, then you should either have already moved in the last couple months to Analysis Center version 4, and you'll recognize the changes to the user interface that we'll see today. Or if you're on-premise and you haven't moved to the new version yet, then we can talk potentially about how that process might work and what the benefits will be. That's our main goal today. The structure of this session today is to go over the process of creating a report, and while doing that, I'll demonstrate some of the new features of Analysis Center version 4. If you have questions at any point during the session, feel free to raise your hand. Let me know. Don't hold back. Also, if there are more specific questions than I have content in the slideshow to answer, I've got another computer that we just set up ahead of time as a backup, just in case I get some advanced questions. Since I recognize a couple people here, we might get some more advanced questions as well. So my name is Chris Lawrence. I'm with Tech. I've been working with Suite and Analysis Center since 2006, but I've been in either the Law Manager division or the Suite division or some part of this area of work since 2001. So the first question is, what is Analysis Center? If you haven't used it yet, it is a reporting tool that handles a lot of the difficulties of creating reports for you. So if you're building reports in a tool like Crystal Reports, or if you're building them by hand in Excel, you have to do a lot of technical work yourself. You have to know how tables behind the scenes link together, how the matter table relates to the matter invoice table, which relates to the invoice records. All of that is hidden from you with Analysis Center. All you need to know is where you're going to get that information from within eCounsel. If you can find it within eCounsel or within Secretariat, you'll locate it in pretty much the same kind of location within the Analysis Center reporting tool. As long as you have a high-level understanding of the overall structure of the data. In eCounsel, there's a matter, and the matter has entities attached to it. The matter also has invoices attached to it. The entities, those players on the matter, may or may not be related to a specific invoice. But you don't need to know how all the individual tables link. You just have to have a high-level understanding. Then you can create all kinds of reports. Simple reports that just list data, summarize data, subtotals, totals, or create complex graphing outputs. The graphing options in the prior version of Analysis Center were pretty good, but there were at least a few of our clients who needed to create a report, generate a graph, export to Excel, go into that exported Excel document, tweak things, change things around. The new version 4 has significantly greater graphing capabilities, and so a lot of that extra manual labor should be eliminated in this version. So in Analysis Center, when creating reports, the vast majority of reports can be all drag and drop or close to drag and drop. We'll go through the process of how those would work. However, it's also possible to build more advanced reports, particularly using formulas and variables with an Excel formula-like syntax. If you were here on Monday, we went through some of those. We'll talk a little bit about that today as well, but that'll be near the end of the presentation. But the formulas will allow you to really build significantly more advanced reports than you would be able to do otherwise. Analysis Center also is aware of who is running a report. So if you're creating the report, you may be an administrator of the system. You have access to every record in the system. When you're generating that original template report, you're designing it, you can see all the records in the system because you are who you are. Once that template is done and you publish it to be a public report template and another user goes to run it, they may not see all of those same records because the record level security from eCounsel is honored automatically in these reports. You don't have to worry about managing that. So if you create a report template, publish it as a public report, then the record level security just comes along for the ride. Behind the scenes is the SAP Business Objects Web Intelligence tool. And if you're into software, it's version XIR 4.2 SP3. If you don't care, you don't have to worry about that. The other aspect of this tool, which is very nice, is unlike Crystal Reports, desktop intelligence, things of that sort, you don't need to have a local application installed on your desktop. As long as you can access the website where this is being hosted, your eCounsel environment in particular, then you can make all of these reports right in your web browser. So it's a thin client application. Launching Analysis Center, both the old version and the new version, works by logging into eCounsel, and then on the far right-hand side, if you have permission to create new Analysis Center reports, you would click on that Analysis Center link on the far right of your toolbar, and it would open up this screen on the bottom. And this screen shows a list of all of our private reports. Those are reports that you have created, only you can see, only you can edit. And here you can see there's one report called Matter Reserves in that private reports folder from my user. The public reports on the right-hand side with a report called Matter Player is a list of all of the reports that have been published for anyone to use. These public reports, generally, unless you go through and play around with the permissions to restrict this, these public reports can be run by anyone who has access to eCounsel. So they can just refresh the data. They can be edited and changed by anyone who has a license to use Analysis Center. So if I create a new report and then someone wants to edit that report, they would be able to do that as long as they are also an Analysis Center user. The process of creating a new report consists of clicking the Begin button up at the top right of the initial Analysis Center window, and then I'll go through the process, but you actually just drag things around, create a report like that in just a few minutes. Simple reports are extremely easy to do. If you want a list of all cases opened in the last 30 days, that's a 45-second report, as long as your network is working well and you don't have any delays loading pages. So here's where we get into some of the differences between the older version of this tool and version 4. The older version of the tool, you'll click on Begin and it would launch you directly into a new report. In this version, you click Begin and it brings you to a mostly blank screen. And there's a good reason for this, even though it's a little misleading at first. Once you're in this screen, you can create a new report or open an existing report by clicking on one of those two buttons in the toolbar. If you have created a new report, you then have to pick the universe that you're going to use, and in your environment, almost exclusively, there will only ever be one universe to pick from. I happen to have multiples because this is just a demo system that we were setting up for this. environment. So you would click New, you'd select the only universe you can, and then you get to this screen. So now we're back to where you used to immediately get dropped when you clicked on New. This is the query panel, which allows you to define what kind of data is going to show up on the report. On the left-hand side, we have a list of folders, and this list of folders is broken out and designed in the same manner as eCounsel itself. We've got matters first, entities, people, invoices, calendar. Inside those folders is a list of all of the objects, tabs, sub-objects in eCounsel. And if there's a field that exists in eCounsel, it will be available here in the universe as well. In addition to all of the major folders, there's also the subfolders like base info invoice, document, progress notes, etc. In some of these folders, such as base info matter, document, progress notes, there's also some additional fields you don't normally see in eCounsel. Audit fields in particular, like the date that the record was added to the system, the date it was last updated, and who updated it, so you can keep track of changes to the records. That information is always stored by eCounsel by default. It's just not displayed normally. To actually create a new report, the first thing we do is define which fields you want to see on the report output. And then by dragging those from the left-hand side, over here, over to the right, go back a couple slides. So you drag it from here up to the top area there. We're just making a list of all the fields that will show up on the report output. So we can count them, group them, display them. Once we've gone through all our folders on the left-hand side and defined what we want to see on the output, we can then go through the exact same list of objects and then drag them to the middle of the window where the query filters area is. And then any field you can display, you can filter against, and when you're filtering against those fields, you have a number of options. So in this case, I have chosen the matter, name, and number field. I can decide that I want to pick just a certain list of matters to include in this report, but there are a number of other Boolean operators I can use here, yes or no, true or false kinds of choices. In list, not in list, equal to, not equal to, greater than. Greater than or equal to doesn't really make sense for a matter name comparison. More useful for number fields and date objects. It's also possible to, instead of trying to then type in values to compare to, if you select from the filters drop-down list on the right-hand side, value from list, it brings up a live window that shows all of the values for that field as of right this second. So if you add a new matter to the system and then create this filter just a minute later, the matter should be available in this list. You can always click on this refresh list button if you need to. The list itself will show you the last time it was refreshed down at the bottom. If you don't know which items you want to filter against, because you're going to create this report template, someone else is going to run it, and they're going to define what time period they're looking for, what matter types they want to include. In this case, which matters they want to look at. You can set the filter to use a prompt. You don't really have to do anything to make this work. You just tell it be a prompt, and then when you run the report, it will ask the user, please enter values for, in this case, matter, name, and number. When the user runs the report, they will see this prompt window. All of your prompts listed down the left-hand side. You can have any number that you want. And then you have the ability to pick, or the user has the ability to pick from this list of values and move them from the options on the left to the selected values on the right. It's possible to have multiple filters. So you can filter not just on any one field within the system, but any number of fields in the system. You just keep dragging items into that filter area in the center of the query panel, and then set each one to some logical value. So the matter, name, and number here is using a prompt. So it says matter, name, and number in list, enter values for. Open date has to be greater than a preset date. Matter status is active, and the state has to be in the following list. It's also possible to change the AND logic for all these to an OR. Just by clicking on the word AND, it toggles back and forth. It's also possible to create what are called nested filters. By dragging a field not just into the query area, but if I drag it physically onto one of the other filters, it pairs them together. So I can make nested filters that act like parentheses around a subquery. So matter name in list, open date greater than, and then in this case, litigated in list, there's no value there, and matter status equal to active, or the state is in the list. By combining multiple levels of nested filters, different kinds of ANDs and OR statements, you can get very specific in what you will return in your report, so you don't have to do any manual cleanup later. So here's an example of all active cases opened this year, as long as the close date is blank or after September 1st, the case is marked as litigated, or it was located in one of the states or provinces specified. Then at the very bottom of this version 4 query panel, there's a new area, which is the data preview window. We were having some issues with it on Monday. For some reason in the morning, it didn't want to show anything, and then we came back after lunch and it was working fine. So I'm not sure exactly what triggered that. Normally, I haven't had any issues. If you're moving to this version, if you see that behavior, let us know. Maybe we can track down what was causing it. It may have just been the demo environment we were using. But normally, instead of having to run the entire report, if you just want to get a quick preview to make sure you've included all the fields that you need, make sure that the fields actually contain data that makes sense for your report, you can do so just by clicking refresh on that data preview window that's at the bottom. Once your query is ready, you can click on a Run Query button, and then it will provide you with an output in this vertical sort of table layout, a very simple grid with all the fields you selected in the order you specified. If you were doing a search rather than an Analysis Center report, this is sort of where you stop. You've found the records you want, you have your output. With Analysis Center, we can now continue much farther down this path. We can change the layouts, we can group the data, do all kinds of calculations. So this is really just the beginning. The report layout area, this is the second half of creating a report in Analysis Center. Looks like this now. So if you're used to the old version of the tool, you'll notice that the user interface, particularly at the top, looks very different. None of the tools are gone. They're reorganized into functional groups like a Microsoft Office ribbon. So all of the items are still here. If you right-click on something, as we'll see, you still have that big, long right-click context menu with lots of functions available in it. There's also a whole bunch of new features that were not available before. Part of why they redesigned it like this is they didn't have enough room to keep adding buttons to those old toolbars. So on the left-hand side, we have the control tabs. These used to be down at the bottom, so it's the same items, they're just over here now. You got the toolbar up at the top, and then the main report staging area, which apparently I highlighted twice. It's very important. In this version, version 4, if you want to reorganize the columns in table, all you have to do is click and then just drag it to the new location. The old version, you had to do a couple steps to reorganize fields, but you don't have to do that anymore. Same as the old version, if you want to get rid of a column or a header row, you can right-click on one of the, whatever it is that you want to delete, and just select delete. In this version, it's very important to note what you're clicking on. If you click on a data row right here, one of these rows of data, and click delete, it's going to delete this column. If I clicked on the word open date, the actual header, it would either let me delete the column or it would let me delete just the header row itself. If I want to delete the table, I have to click on just the outer edge of the table so that it knows I'm selecting the table, not the column. So the old version of the tool, where you were clicking was very important. In the new version of the tool, where you were clicking is very important. The art of mousing around in Analysis Center. If you want to add a new column to a table, and this comes up a lot, you can find the object on the left-hand side in your Available Objects tab, This is just a list of all the objects that I added to my available objects list in the query panel. I drag this down to my table that exists already. If I position my mouse cursor to the left of an existing column, it's going to insert a new column. If I put it on top of an existing one, it will replace it. If I miss my table, I go too far off and my mouse is over here somewhere, then it will create a brand new table completely. One thing I didn't put in this slide is if I have a section grouping on one field, for instance, if I'm grouping my data by state, and then I want to reorganize that report so that it's now grouped by region instead, I don't have to go through a process of removing groupings and then adding groupings. I can just take this region object, drag it right on top of the state grouping label where it's showing Alabama, Arkansas, everything else. I just drag it right on top and drop it right there, and it will automatically resort and regroup all the data by region now. Yes, that is a great question.
Can you repeat that for me, please, so we can get it on the tape? I didn't.
Yes, there was a question that said, is there an undo button? So if you drag it into the wrong place, can you undo that action? This is my favorite button in the whole application right there, because that's the multi-level undo. You can go all the way back to the last time you saved your report. So. Is it also a keyboard shortcut? Yes, Control-Z. All of the items, I shouldn't say all the items, many of the items, question was, is there a keyboard shortcut for this? And there is. Undo is Control-Z. Many of the other items in the tool not only have keyboard shortcuts, but when you hover over them, it will tell you what they are. Question was, where was the undo button? And the answer is right here. So it's for the people who are listening to the recording in the future, they can't see my pointer. It's under the File tab, right above available objects. I had mentioned that it's possible to create a new table. And this is often something that you would do on purpose as well, not just by missing the first table. If you have different kinds of data and you don't necessarily want them to work together on a single table, you'd want to see all of the invoices by state and then separately all of the cases opened by month. Those are two very different views of the data. And in that case, you can create separate tables, all pulling the data from the one query you've created, but looking at that data in very different ways. We can then turn those into charts. We can have multiple charts on a single output, get a report that looks a lot like a dashboard that way. Resizing columns works just like Excel. You can auto resize or auto height fit if you're displaying a comment box of some sort. So all of that works very similarly to Excel. You can also control the sorting. This works pretty much the same way as the last version as well. Right-click on a cell, select ascending, descending, or custom sort. Custom sort only works if you have less than 100 values in that column. So it's a good one for custom sorting the states, offices, not matter names, too many of those. Formatting options are roughly the same, however, there are additional options now. You have general formatting options like font colors and borders, things of that sort. It's also possible at the table or chart level to change whether or not data shows up if your numbers are all blank for a particular record, whether or not a table will allow itself to break across a page break, or whether it moves up to the next page automatically. All sorts of the charts, the new kinds of charts have just tons and tons of options as far as like minimum font size, how far apart the values show up from each other along the x-axis. So many different layout options available. There's two main ways to group data in the tool. The first one is a section, looks like this. So you have the section label at the top, and then a instance of the table with all of the, in this case, Alaska matters, Arizona matters, Arkansas matters, etc. The second option is a break. It's pretty similar in that it breaks up the data in the same way, but you don't have that floating cell at the top. Sections impact all of the charts and all the tables on your report. Breaks only impact that one table. In this version, there is also a new way to group data, which we couldn't do before without manually creating a bunch of variables to do it. In this version of the tool, you have a grouping wizard, which will allow you to look at a field like the state and then decide that instead of grouping our data by Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, et cetera, we're going to group these into southern states, western states, New England states, mid-Atlantic states. And then when we group our data, it's going to group by that arbitrary region that we've created. And then lastly, you can also do this sort of summary table in a way that I'll mention in just a few minutes. We can still create counts and sums of things very easily just by right-clicking on a number field, creating a sum, right-clicking on anything else and counting it. This menu option is now in a slightly different place. It used to be in a menu called Calculation. It's now just in an Insert menu called Insert. Same functions, just a different location. Now, in the old version, you didn't have this next item. So this is new for everybody. And that is the ability to show just the top or bottom records based on some numeric field. So if you wanted to see the top 5 vendors based on how much they billed you last year, you can use this tool to select top 3 is selected, top 5 would be an option based on some kind of numeric field. Ranked by is another option there. You could also tell it to give you the top 5 vendors by state last year, for instance. Conditional formatting is now available. This is also something that was not available until this version. So if we wanted to create rules that would conditionally format text based on some numeric value, in this case, any state where there is more than 4 matters, I've flagged in red, and anything that has only 1 matter, I've flagged in green. It's possible to have more than just 2 rules. You can combine all kinds of different rules so that not only do they have different colors based on different criteria, we could also have multiple criteria. So the case count could be equal to 1, and then I can click on this plus button to add additional criteria to say it's only green if the case count is equal to 1. It's not Arizona for some reason. Since we're standing here, I'll pick that one. So we can make very carefully selected conditional filtering or conditional formatting options. An often asked for tool in the last version. The right-click context menu, nice and large with lots of options as always. What's in here depends on what you're clicking on. And so you have to be just aware that if you're not seeing the option you want, it's probably because of what you have clicked on. You should be able to do things like copy and cut objects, insert new columns and rows, is, again, similar to Excel, delete things, create new sections, turn tables into charts and vice versa. I'll skip this one because I'll come back to it in a minute. We can group data, filter data in just a table rather than the whole query filter that we started with. So we can have one table filtered down differently from the table right next to it. We can do the rankings that we just saw, sort the data, create groupings based on breaks, and then all those fun formatting options. Almost every function is available here in this menu. There's a couple of additional features that are not. So this is always the place that I recommend looking first if you're looking to do something. Start in that right-click menu, and then you don't have to find it in those tabs. It'll be right there. Just a couple options so you know what they look like. Insert sub-menu. You've got rows and columns that you can insert. Ranking lets you add, edit, and remove ranking, create filters. Different kinds of charts. Column charts, line charts, pie charts, and as we'll see in just a minute, many, many, many more in this version of the tool. When looking at the toolbar, it's still important to know what you have clicked on. There are certain tabs that may not show up if you don't have something selected. The majority of these tabs are always there. They look exactly how they look. but I've run into a couple things where I'm trying to demo something and I realize that I can't find the tab because I forgot to select something first. They are broken up into these major categories and then subsequently into these subcategories. It does actually make quite a bit of sense. If you're used to the old layout, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's a very logical grouping. The difference between query filters, which we started with at the beginning, which filter all of the records in your report, and the kinds of filters that I just pointed out that said you could have one table filtered one way and another table filtered a different. Those are called quick filters. The reason why quick filters are really important is that query filters exist at the query panel level, which means you can filter on objects, things that exist in the universe, like the matter name. Quick filters happen after the report has actually run. So if I wanted to filter on the matter name, I can do a query filter at the query level. But if I want to filter against a count of matters, that is a thing that doesn't exist in the query panel. It's not in the universe. First, I have to get all those matters, then I can count them. Then I can create a quick filter in order to filter out just states that have less than 5 matters. Another example, you can do something like only show vendors whose total invoice amount for the past 6 months is greater than $1 million. You can show just matters where there is not a progress note in the last 30 days. So it's possible to, that's a typo, that should say quick filters. It's possible to filter individual tables with quick filters. You can filter in, graphical charts. You can also filter entire groupings, sections. You can filter your entire report tab with these. Building of the filter is the same as a query filter. You add individual fields from your available objects that you've added to your original query and then just start filtering them in the same manner. So there's no different technique. It's just a question of when that process happens. As long as you have at least one numeric and one non-numeric field, then you can create a chart. Some charts require 2 non-numeric fields, like a crosstab. You need an X and a Y axis, so bar charts and line charts, crosstabs. Pie charts, you can do it with just a numeric field and a non-numeric field. Start with creating a table. Make sure you've got the number and the thing you want to show the number grouped by in a table, and then just right-click on it, turn it into a pie chart, and there's your pie chart. This is a pretty busy pie chart, so I'd probably want to either filter this down farther, or I could start playing around with the formatting options to show the actual values for the wedges. Either hide that key on the right-hand side or maybe include those in the actual view of the chart itself. If you've used this tool before, you know that you have some bar chart options, horizontal and vertical, some line chart options, pie chart options, and then that's about it. Version 4, you've got columns, you've got line charts, and then pie charts, and also a whole lot of other ones. We briefly experimented with the tag cloud on Monday. Let me go back one so I can explain this one. Tag cloud would show a state name based on how big that number is. So the state with the largest number of cases would be physically the largest state name showing up on your tag cloud. So instead of someone having to look through this table, find a number, you just display that while you're giving a talk, and that one state shows up right in the middle. A whole lot of new options. In addition to all these different options, you also have a lot more in the way of formatting options, including an often requested feature of being able to change the colors to whatever color scheme you want. You're no longer limited to the defaults. A lot of people don't think it's important. Some companies are very stringent about which colors are used in the charts that they give to the boards in their board reports. When we started, I mentioned that the process of creating a new report is different. You get that blank screen, you have to click new. The reason why that is the case now is because of this option. This is the new Save As dialog box. The old version, you had the ability to type in a report name and select whether it was going to be a private report for just you or public, and that's all. That's everything. In this version of the tool, you get an entire file system. You can save these reports pretty much to anywhere you want. It is important to know where you're saving them because the same private and public report folders exist. But now, as a report author, you have the ability to also see all of the other reports. You can save some of these reports to a backup folder if you want to have backups of them. If I'm working on a report and Matt wants to check it out, or I want him to QA it for me, we don't have to go through this rigmarole to get him access to it before I make it a public report. He can just see it and open it. So this works like a fully featured save and open dialog box, which previously you did not have access to. The private report folder is your username, and then under that, either eCounsel or Secretariat. The public report folder is always called shared reports. So if you want to save a report to be a public report, you need to save it to the shared reports, either eCounsel or Secretariat folders. If I save this report to my favorites, I'll be able to see it and run it myself, but no one else will have access to it. The other really nice part of this window is this folder right here with the little tilde in front of it. That's the folder that stores all of the work that you were doing when your power went out and you thought you had lost all of the last hour's worth of work. When you log back in again, it's happily sitting right there waiting for you to pick it up, save a copy of it somewhere else, and keep working. I did add a slide for that. And actually, yes, on Monday, when I was preparing for the class on Monday, I was working on something, and we had a network dropout. Thought I had lost the work I was doing, but no, it was saved right there. Question, yes?
I just have a question about the folder structure. So if a coworker of mine has access to my folder, but she has different eCounsel access, when she goes out here and pulls it up, and runs it, will it only show her the stuff she has access to, or because I'm the one that created the report and saved it, will it have all of my access?
She would still only see the records that she was allowed to see.
Okay.
Yeah. So even though the view is different, we're still protected by that record level security. Also note that this folder structure that we see right here, this is the demo environment, so there's more folders than you'll likely see. So you just have to make sure you can find your username under your eCounsel instance name. So before I get into the advanced items, are there any other questions about things we've talked about so far, particularly with regards to Analysis Center 4? No? Everything went smoothly and we're doing great? No one's asleep? Excellent. Some of the things that have been added in this version is subqueries. If you've used this tool before, if you've taken my class on Analysis Center report building, we've probably done advanced examples like show me all the matters that were open in the last 30 days that do not yet have an assigned attorney. That is more complicated than it sounds like, because what you're trying to find is not a person who's playing the role different than an assigned attorney. You're trying to find a person who does not exist, so you can't go looking for it. There's a way to do it in the old version. However, it took a bunch of steps. In the new version, no, I don't have a slide for this one. In the new version, you create a subfolder, and fortunately I don't have it in the slide, so you'll have to imagine it, but it will say that return all the cases where the matter number is not in the matters that do have an assigned attorney. So it finds all the matters with an assigned attorney. If there are any that don't, that were open in the last 30 days, it will show up on your report. This is an example that comes straight out of the built-in demonstration system. And in this case, it would be show all of the invoice records where the year is in 2006, the sales revenue was of a certain amount, and the product line is not in the product lines that sold really well in 2005. So in this case, you're looking just for product lines that have a better, a significantly better improvement over the prior year. This could be something where you would do a similar kind of comparison, only show those vendors that have a significant difference in the year-over-year billing rates. So subqueries can significantly enhance the query panel functionality. It's possible to create prompts for your filters, as I mentioned before. The user runs the report, a window pops up and asks them for some input. It's always been possible to then show whatever they have picked on your report header. So this would be the open cases report, and it would give you whatever the date range the user picked as the subheader, so you know when you're looking at the report what date range we're looking at. In order to do that, it took a bunch of steps, and I did that at the very end of the 2-day class. And then I would send the process to everybody in the class, so they had a copy of it, because the steps involved are more complicated than they should be. So in this version, you don't have to do any of that. You go to this cell tab, predefined prompt, and it'll show you a list of all the prompts. And then you just drag it onto the report. At that point, if you want to see how that all worked, you can click on it. You can see the old method behind the scenes. It's still doing the same thing. It just automates it for you now. So in this case, this is a report where we picked states, and then the report header now shows all the states that I picked. So this is the end of a couple days. You've been to a lot of sessions. We've talked about a lot of different products. So this is probably a little more complicated than anyone's interested in getting into right now. But if you build a report, you do all the drag and dropping that you want to, you realize that you need to change the fundamental way that the report works. It does everything really easily for you, but we need to, instead of summarizing all the vendor amounts by state, we need to first calculate the amounts by county and then do some filtering and then display them by state. We have to do something more advanced than the default options. We have the ability to write these formulas and create any kind of functionality that we might want. The simplest formula is just, like Excel, an equal sign in the front and then quotes around something. All of the column headers and report titles work that way. Anything that's got a bracket, square bracket around it, and an object name in the middle, it just shows that content. So if I go back at one screen, over on the right, we've got a table. That cell right there under state is defined equal to open square bracket, state, close square bracket. And you can see that, you can edit it, you can play around with it if you want. We can play around with it and edit it by doing things like this, and put the word count in between the equal sign and that open square bracket, and parenthesis on the end, and now it's going to count the matter number, name and number instead of just displaying it. We can sum invoices, we can count things. The sums and counts and averages are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the functions that we have available to us. Everything, including the one that I mentioned on Monday, is one of my favorites, which is interpolation. If you have a running data set, and it shows this nice graph over time, and then for some reason, the person gathering that data, March of 2012, was off. And so you have a hole in your data set right there, and your graph shows this beautiful line and then nothing, and then it starts again. The interpolation function will draw a trend line against your data, figure out where that missing data likely would have been, and then it sticks a data point in there so you get a nice continuous graph. There's standard deviation functions, so you can do statistical analysis. There's a ton of features once you get to this variables area of the tool. There are a number of new variable functions in version 4. There were already many, many, many. I think there's like 200 functions in the old version. There is a document that I can provide anyone who's interested that goes through every single function available in the system, how it works, what the options are. It's about 400 pages long. So if you want some light reading, I'm more than happy. The creation of the variables happens here in this window, and the formula goes into this box using your objects on the left, all of those functions, and then additional features on the right-hand side, like pulling values from a field. So if I wanted to only check certain matter names and numbers, I don't have to write a formula that says if matter name and number equals matter number 4. I can instead say if matter name and number, click on this, and it will give me a list of options to pick from, a list of matter names to pick from. Also will let me compare against prompt values that the user has picked, so I can check to see not only did the filtering work, but is this specific matter somehow also related to those input parameters. We could spend weeks in a session just going over all of those options. There are functions in here, and there are options on this operator side. I've been using the tool now for 13, 14 years. There are things that I've never used. I don't know how they work. I've tried maybe once just to see how they work, and that's as far as I've gone. So many, many, many options. A lot of times these functions, you can just double click on things and it will build them formulas for you. You don't have to type stuff out. Some simple formulas if you want to concatenate two fields together so that vendor name and vendor invoice number stick together in one cell. You can just use plus signs to do that. If you want the current date, there's a current date function. So we get into combining things. If I take that current date function and I then wrap the month number of year function around it, I get today's month number, which is 9. So if I run this report next month, I don't have to update my report manually. It will automatically say 10, next month 11. If I want the percentage of budget remaining, the budget amount field minus the sum of the adjusted amount over the budget amount times 100. So here's a list of some of your functions. That's not even the whole list. I ran out of space. Are there any other questions? Yes.
I just wondered if you were getting a manual, an updated manual, some user cases, some examples for creating typical reports, rather than all of us having to kind of reinvent the wheel. I wondered if there was anything like that that existed.
So there is an updated manual for version 4. When you're talking about user cases, things like that.
Something really simple, like I'm just making this up on the fly, but how many matters did we open and close this month? And then I'd like to also see cumulative for our fiscal year, which is between this date and this date.
So would that be maybe like a step-by-step guide of how to build something just like that?
Well, I just wondered if all of your users here have some kind of standard reports that we're all creating on our own. And I just wondered if there was any method for us to share that. I don't know if you've thought about a portal that had kind of the parameters for some standard reports that each one of us creates.
So we have discussed many times the idea of having more standard report sets available. And unfortunately, we've run into the problem that the high level, like the name of the report, is very similar between different agencies and companies, but how things are actually calculated seems to vary. But just having people talk to each other about maybe how you've built similar reports, or when either Matt or myself come on site to teach a class, part of that is usually building reports with you. And so then the reports that we've built in the past that do things like that would come into play. We don't have a portal where these reports would be able to be shared. Reason being that they're tied directly to a single universe, so you can't really transfer them easily. We could do something where either we have instructions on how you might create a report like that. Later next month in October, I'm going to start recording a number of short 5 to 10 minute training videos on a different product. I could suggest maybe adding some of those. We could solicit some requests of things that might be common reports?
I'm just thinking if I had an opportunity to post something saying, hey, this is the report that I need to run, I bet there's a good chance that someone has already done that. And I know we have different universes, but it could be so basic. It could be, matter type, some other fields that everyone's sort of using. They might have a different label, but looking at trends, where the formulas and things like that start to get a little more complicated. It'd be nice to not have to spend a lot of time doing that when someone else has already tackled that and is willing to share it. Number of days, things like that. It's, it's when you start getting into the weeds like that, for me, I get lost. And I feel like I just don't take advantage of the program because of that.
Okay. Well, we have discussed the possibility of having standard reports. Maybe rather than us trying to brainstorm and hit the same wall again, maybe what we can do is actually reach out to try and discuss what kinds of reports you guys have built. And maybe we could backport that into the product.
Yeah, I know an example right off the top of my head. You have a really great Crystal report that shows budget to actuals for a matter. We've always wanted one that had any budgeted matter. And I've struggled with that. Any matter and I want to see all of them, for a certain period of time.
So it would be a budget versus actuals with a user-defined time period with no additional filters. It would just be, if it's got a budget, it would show up on the report?
Yes.
Okay. Does anyone else have either agreement with that particular example or other examples you might be interested in? That would be helpful? Okay.
Oh, I just said that, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
I think you guys should put together a listserv that clients can join, and we'd be able to like email screenshots around of our queries. I'd be happy to share those.
Okay.
And if anybody eCounsel analysis center user listserv or something like that. Just
Do you know what the name of that support or success portal that's being set up currently? I'm not sure. There's
Customer command, basically.
correct. There's some sort of a
Like the
portal.
support portal that you can roll out.
Okay.
And it's a work in progress.
No, thank you.
You're going to hear more information about it. So, right, so the question was, because we're talking about like sharing information, sharing reports, et cetera, just building a community around this custom stuff that you're able to do. And we're definitely, there's a number of initiatives underway that are going to affect both how you actually interact with support and how you interact with each other. And so we've already kind of got the pieces in place and we're building it, and you will be getting more notifications in the future about how to log in, how to submit tickets through that portal as opposed to what you're doing now, which is just picking up the phone or sending us an email, things like that. So just kind of be on the lookout for that. But that is also going to be able to allow us to do, Lisa, what you're asking about is if you've got a report that you spent the time to build and you want to share it with other folks, you can do that. And we'll have to work out some details about how you're going to get that report out of your system, especially if you're a hosted client, for example. But yeah, that's exactly the sort of thing that this portal is going to allow us to do. So definitely keep an eye out for that. But again, we're still putting those pieces in place right now.
All right, excellent. Thank you. I thought that I had remembered that was going to be the case, so thank you for confirming and expanding on that. So we'll have to see as that progresses, make sure that we talk and that it is actually doing what you're thinking of. But I'm glad to hear that you're interested and willing to share the experience that you have building queries. And some of the reports that I've seen this week have been absolutely astounding to see. Some of the complexities that people have been able to build have been really great. It's possible to make very easy reports very quickly in Analysis Center. Again, those list of open case reports are very easy. The more complicated reports, as you guys have built, still remain complicated. I find most of them to be easier still than building it in Excel by hand or Crystal. And then once you've built it, you have the ability to just refresh the data. You don't have to rebuild it every month. So putting that upfront investment of time in to build the template is worthwhile, particularly if it's something that you build often, you have to report on often. I often bring up a report that I built in this tool that had 600 different calculations across 2 pages, calculating fiscal year start and end dates, comparing things within each, going back 3 years, so fiscal year -2, so that you could do comparisons across time. That did require formulas. It was not just a drag and drop report, but you can build reports like that in this tool. If you do have additional questions, feel free to ask myself, support. I can always either come on site or do a WebEx training so we can build reports, or we can just go through the process itself. Matt Scott is in the back of the room, and he is an excellent resource. He taught this class before I did, so he knows his stuff as well. But thank you all for coming, and if you do have additional questions, feel free to ask us. But otherwise, enjoy your evening, because you are done.
Thank you.